Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 3:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today on the program, Mike Davis will breathe that fire he's so famous for, coming up at 3:30 as he reacts to the latest iterations of the lawfare against Trump, including President Trump. What a ridiculous ending to a ridiculous trial. He is sentenced with no punishment in New York. What a stupid ending to a stupid saga. Mike Davis reacts to that. David Strum will be with us from Hot Air today at 4 o'clock. We'll talk Los Angeles and the incompetence coming out of that city's leadership, that state's leadership. Glenn Youngkin is here, the governor of Virginia. He just met with President Trump last night alongside a bunch of other Republican governors down in Mar-a-Lago. We'll ask him about that. That's at 4:30. And then at 5 o'clock, Justin Schubau is here, the president of the National Civic Art Society. We'll talk about what it means to have President Trump back and whether it means our nation's capital might become more beautiful again. That's an important thing. Typically underappreciated, though. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The Wacky Juan Merchan case finally came to a conclusion today, and it was a sentencing which resulted in, as I mentioned, zero punishment, and it's unconditional. It was an unconditional discharge, is what they say. That's it. It's over. There's no punishment, but you should know you are a convicted felon, and the left is very excited about this today. It does sound like they're coping, doesn't it? Because I thought their deepest, darkest desires, and they're not that deep, they were crowing about it in public, was to literally have President Trump locked up, put in leg irons, put in the prison jumpsuit, throw him in jail, reopen Alcatraz, make him the sole occupant, whatever it takes to try and humiliate this guy. That was their plan. And they have now settled for, well, yes, there's no punishment, but he's a convicted felon. Oh, man. It used to be that you could be a rapper and have a very successful career by being a convicted felon. I walked away from this today going, this is the most gangster thing he's done all day. This is the most gangster. Now he's a convict. All right, fine. Well, how did that work out for you during the election? It's not like any of this was a mystery. The voters knew about all this. What did they do? Oh, they elected the guy. He only became more popular given the circumstances, given the nonstop abuse from these lefties. And so today, there was something kind of exceptional. You remember during the actual trial where Alvin Bragg had brought these charges for a bookkeeping dispute with Donald Trump. We never got any audio or video from inside of the courtroom. We got transcripts. We got reporters who were writing it up. We had people being hysterical on MSNBC, but you never really got to hear anything. And today, the difference is Juan Merchan, absent the ability to hurt Trump, to punish him or throw him in jail because he's becoming president of the United States now by virtue of the voters, they had to settle for, well, we'll record this and we'll release it to the public, which is what they did. Here, perhaps for the first time, maybe in terms of the audio that you've heard of him, is Wacky Juan Merchan.
It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce, that Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No. Ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections.
Let me point out something really obvious about this, and Mike Davis will help us explore the details. No citizen has ever been charged with anything like what Trump was just charged with. None. Nobody, unless their name is Donald Trump, would be charged with something like this. This was a preposterous attempt to take down Trump. Completely novel in terms of it being a legal theory. And so Juan Merchan talking about, oh, you're not above the law. No, he's beneath it. That's the way this has been conducted.
It is the office of the president that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause and presidential immunity. It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence. After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree.
Put differently, there is no sentence. An unconditional discharge, it means there's no sentence. And he's angry about this, that he can't impose a sentence on Trump. Well, I reviewed everything, and it turns out I'm not even allowed to get in your way here. Yeah, that's right. This whole thing was so stupid. Here, before I get to President Trump himself, and he spoke today. He spoke from Mar-a-Lago. He did it remotely. Here is President Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, talking about the case and how it was in no way consistent with the laws of New York State at all.
A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that, and as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many, many, many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also on the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States.
That last line stinging, I'm sure. Juan, the Biden donor, whose daughter is very active in left-wing politics, who became party to this effort to take down their top political opponent using the court system and failed, face-planted, leading to today where he imposes no sentence on President Trump whatsoever. President Trump today announcing that even having gone through this is going to amount to a tremendous setback for the New York court system.
This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense.
A payment for a non-disclosure agreement is explicitly a legal expense, which is how it was kept in the books, but which, by the way, the books themselves were private. They weren't even a matter of public consumption. And yet they came out in this trial and the expenses were properly documented. But again, at its core, this was a gigantic bookkeeping dispute that they turned into a criminal trial. Here is President Trump saying that, hey, look, all of the top legal minds have said this case should have never been brought to begin with.
The top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt, and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice.
Yeah, and that was that assessment, by the way, was not just limited to right-wing lawyers, but lawyers from across the political spectrum had been indicating that they thought that this case was tremendously weak. And even with a sweetheart jury that they arranged in order to achieve a conviction, that this thing will be defeated on appeal. It's a travesty that it was ever brought. It's a joke and a total abuse of the system, a waste of taxpayer dollars, and an attempt, again, to just take down their political opponent. And it blew up in their face. In fact, as President Trump said today, people watched the case, and all of a sudden he gets the most votes of a Republican candidate in history.
Damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it.
And also, he made sure to mention that he was restrained from using his First Amendment rights. Juan Merchan got in the way of President Trump's ability to campaign on what was happening to him.
I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense.
Yep.
It was called a legal expense.
Well, in other words, I mean, I hope the message was clear to everybody involved there, both Alvin Bragg and Wacky Juan Merchan, that they should feel ashamed of wasting the country's time here. There are so many more pressing concerns. And here they've tied Donald Trump up in a courtroom in an attempt to destroy him. And it just looks so silly and petty and disgusting in contrast to the human suffering that's going on across our country and especially right now in California. So you should be ashamed of yourselves is what President Trump is saying here. He also says, despite this supposed gag order, he also made sure to point out that, the Biden Justice Department has been involved in all of this. Now, the left keeps denying it, but there's no question that Matthew Colangelo went from the Biden DOJ into the Manhattan DA's office in order to help run this case against Trump. Why would you do that? Who does that? What attorney leaves from such a high-powered position in the United States Department of Justice and then goes to be a prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office? What would be the reason for that other than to destroy Trump?
I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to exclaim that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
President Trump, a lot calmer, I think, than most of us would be given the circumstances. Calm in the face of all of this as he gives those final statements inside of that courtroom today, although he did it from a distance. He wasn't there. He's too busy preparing for his presidency. Looking forward to Mike Davis. He's just minutes away. We'll talk to him about everything President Trump was subjected to in that courtroom. And what's the deal with the United States Supreme Court? They didn't stop this sentencing today. They had a chance to restore some order to the country. But John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett joined the lefties last night in a late-night decision, saying that the sentencing could continue. Crazy. Meanwhile, Justices Clarence Thomas, Justice and Alito and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh all said they would have granted President Trump's request. That's what they indicated last night. Not surprised that those are the four. Let's see. Dennis is in Waldorf now on line 2. Dennis, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. Now it's time for all the Republicans to come out of the woodwork and say, oh, we need to turn the other cheek and, no tit for tat. But if I was Trump, I would have ended that with saying I'm going to direct my Justice Department to investigate every aspect of this trial and others.
Yes.
And also anything else that can be done, like the Latisha James and all those folks. We need to do to the Democrats what they do to us.
And the role that the United States Department of Justice under Joe Biden played in coordinating all of these attacks on Trump. That's squarely within Trump's ability to get some answers on when he comes into office. I'm right there with you. And I know Mike Davis is too.
But Lindsey Graham's going to come out. Oh no, we can't do this because of the. We got to be above it all, and we got to, and also all these people that they've ruined the lives of that have been, cold conspirators and stuff for these sham trials. Somebody ought to do what do they call it when they all get together and sue? Class action.
Yeah.
And sue the life out of these folks.
Yeah, I like the direction you're headed, Dennis. That's a good idea. And Mike Davis has some very choice words for all of the people you're talking about. He'll deliver them next here on WMAL. Hey, good afternoon to you. It is now 3:35, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, David Strom will be with us from Hot Air at 4 o'clock. Governor Glenn Youngkin of the Commonwealth of Virginia is here at 4:30. And at 5 o'clock, Justin Schubaugh will be with us. He is the president of the National Civic Arts Society. I want to chat with him about whether or not President Trump can make architecture great again in the nation's capital in particular. A lot to discuss. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. President Trump today speaking inside of that courthouse as he was sentenced to literally no time whatsoever. So he received a sentence of nothing from Juan today, the left rejoicing that President Trump is now officially a convicted felon, they say.
This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense.
For more on all of this, what happened today, Mike Davis is here. He's the founder and president of the Article 3 Project. Sir, good to have you back with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so the left is rejoicing over this today, but as far as I can see it, they just suffered a humiliating defeat. Juan Merchan imposed no punishment on President Trump.
Yeah, I would say to these Democrats who are celebrating today, I hope you have a good time for the next 10 days, because on January 20th at noon, President Trump is going to get sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. He will appoint his acting attorney general on day one. And I think there is going to be serious accountability for this unprecedented republic-ending lawfare in this country at every level, going back to Crossfire Hurricane, where our intel agencies and law enforcement have been politicized and weaponized against Trump. His top aides, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro, who went to prison, his supporters on January 6th, who were politically persecuted under the Supreme Court's Fisher decision last June, parents outraged by gender chaos in schools and the resulting rapes in high school bathrooms, Christians praying at abortion clinics, including a 75-year-old Christian who went to prison thanks to the Biden Justice Department. And while this Biden Justice Department gives amnesty to Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, every scumbag Biden, BLM, Antifa, Hamas, there is going to be severe legal, political, and financial consequences come January 20th at noon. I'm going to make damn sure that happens in my private citizen role running the Article 3 project when I exercise my God-given rights to speak and to redress government, and I'm going to push every day for a criminal probe under 18 USC Section 241, conspiracy against rights, a very serious federal civil rights felony. And it's going to apply to all these lawyers, all these agents, all these witnesses, all these judges, and other co-conspirators who engaged in this republic-ending lawfare against Trump. And that includes people like Andrew Weissman on the outside, and Juan Mershon, and Tish James, and Alvin Bragg, and Matthew Colangelo, and Fannie Willis, and Nathan Wade. I would say to these operatives, lawyer up. Justice is coming.
You mentioned a conspiracy against rights law. Additionally, we just had one of our callers, a legal-minded caller, buzz in just before ahead of our segment and mentioned to us 18 U.S. Code Section 595, which prohibits government employees, federal employees, from using their powers to interfere in a federal election. Boy, it does seem like a lot of that has been happening, Mike Davis.
Yeah, it's so blatantly. Let's just look at what happened in New York today. You have 34 felony counts for the non-felony of a businessman settling a nuisance claim and putting it in his private books as a legal expense with a non-disclosure agreement. Hush money, they call it. I've been a lawyer for nearly 20 years. What the hell else would Trump have called it other than a legal expense? This is routine. I have settled these nuisance claims repeatedly in my legal career, and apparently I've been committing felonies under New York law, under this bogus theory. Remember, the prior Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, the prior Manhattan DA, Cy Vance, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, a Democrat, the Federal Election Commission, and Alvin Bragg himself declined to bring these charges. After Alvin Bragg campaigned on getting Trump, it was Matthew Colangelo, getting deployed from the Biden Justice Department, the number 3 office, a senior political operative, to do this. And Biden's fingerprints are on all 4 of these criminal prosecutions, right? You had Biden's deputy White House counsel, Jonathan Sue, waive Trump's claim of executive privilege on behalf of Biden, which led to the Mar-a-Lago raid and the 2 Jack Smith indictments. You had Nathan Wade, Fannie Willis's dumb, unqualified boyfriend in Fulton County, Georgia, actually stupid enough to bill his time to Fulton County taxpayers, 16 hours, $250 an hour, $4,000 to Fulton County taxpayers for his 2 meetings with the Biden White House, including the White House counsel, before those indictments. Look, this is a criminal conspiracy. And so I hope it was cathartic for these Democrats today, but for Judge Mershon, this corrupt judge whose daughter's raising money off this case, requiring his recusal, I hope it was cathartic today for them to hear this third world Marxist hellhole judge announce his sentence of President Trump, because accountability is coming in 10 days. You know,
Juan Mershon, in his remarks today, I played some of them earlier, indicated that he said, well, any other private citizen would be subjected to the penalties here, which struck me as insane, because no other person has ever been charged with anything that looks like what President Trump was just charged with. This is the first time every legal expert I've talked to, including you, Mike Davis, has ever seen a case like this.
I want to say this very seriously to this Democrat Manhattan judge, Juan Merchan. Lawyer up, buddy, because you have committed a very serious federal civil rights felony, conspiracy against rights, when you did not give President Trump his due process, when you put an illegal, unconstitutional gag order on President Trump. A gag order is supposed to protect a criminal defendant going through the process. It is not supposed to make the criminal defendant not be able to defend himself. So this judge put a gag order on Trump because Trump raised the recusal issue that Lauren Merchan, Judge Merchan's adult daughter, is raising money off of this case. Judge Merchan donated to Biden. Lauren Merchan was paid by Kamala. She's raising money off this case. She's made a lot of money off of this case. Look, I would say to him, look, we're in America. We're not in Colombia. We're not part of the cartels in Colombia. We don't. If you want to come to America, Judge Merchan, don't import your Marxist hellhole values. You come to America because you believe in America. You believe in due process. You believe in the First Amendment right to speak. And he violated Trump's constitutional rights during this process, so he better lawyer up.
Mike Davis, President Trump tried to stop this process this morning, this so-called sentencing. This morning, he sent this up in kind of a dual track. He was appealing up the New York court system, and he also sent an appeal to the United States Supreme Court, given the federal interests that are involved here, including presidential immunity. Last night, the Supreme Court, by a vote of 5-4, rejected President Trump's request. The 4 justices that stood with President Trump and said that they would have granted his request were Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. But fascinatingly, interestingly, perhaps not surprisingly, Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts sided with the leftists on the court, which led to the sentencing this morning. What do you make of that?
So the 5 women voted against Trump. How does that not surprise you? Say to the Chief Justice Roberts, what are you possibly here? You just wrote the opinion in June that any president criminally prosecuted for his official acts. So how the hell can a former president be sentenced? If you can't be prosecuted, how can you be sentenced? And that's exactly what they did. They came up with some mealy-mouthed answer, and it set a horrifying precedent that some local hellhole prosecutor, local hellhole judge has the ability to sentence the president-elect of the United States 10 days before his inauguration and throw him in jail. Merchan did not rule out throwing Trump in jail. He said he probably wouldn't throw Trump in jail, but he didn't rule it out. And you have the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who wrote the presidential immunity decision, said, oh, no big deal. And Amy Coney Barrett, who's this rattled law professor with her head up her ass, what was she doing last night where she couldn't think? Was she knitting? What was possibly going on in Amy Coney Barrett's head last night that they think it's acceptable that this partisan, corrupt, dangerous judge in New York could have put the president in prison today, and they had no problem with that.
In their decision yesterday, as you point out, they wrote that, quote, the burden that the sentencing will impose on the president-elect's responsibilities is relatively insubstantial. Now, I'm sorry, I'm not a lawyer, but my impression is that they're not supposed to be weighing the extent of the sentence, the severity of the sentence. They're supposed to rule on the underlying law, principle, and the Constitution, right?
That's exactly right. It's presidential immunity. The whole point of immunity is you're not brought before the process. How can you be immune from criminal prosecution, but how can you be immune from criminal prosecution but not criminal sentencing, which is worse, right? I mean, the idea that you're going to sentence someone and put him in jail and you're going to weigh the burdens of that. This guy is the president-elect of the United States. He's starting his job as the president in 10 days, and he's distracted from his job picking his personnel and getting security briefings so he can go so we can go get lectured by this corrupt judge so this corrupt judge's daughter can keep making millions of dollars off of this? Look, the Chief Justice and Amy Coney Barrett were an absolute disgrace in that decision.
And now we look ahead. You've mentioned now that we're just 10 days away from the incoming Trump presidency, that all of these people should lawyer up. What do you expect out of some of these top officials, especially the legal officials, Attorney General, potentially Pam Bondi, FBI Director, potentially Kash Patel? What's going to happen when they get into position?
Well, I hope it happens before they get confirmed. I hope that the acting people do this on day one. They need to open a criminal probe on all of this, because when you politicize and weaponize intel agencies and law enforcement to go after your political enemies for non-crimes, that is the very definition of conspiracy against rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241. We've talked about this for years. This goes all the way back to Crossfire Hurricane, Russian collusion hoax, and this has to be investigated. And this is an ongoing criminal conspiracy to cover up Crossfire Hurricane, Russian collusion hoax. They tried to bankrupt Trump. They tried to throw him in prison for the rest of his life in 4 different jurisdictions for non-crimes. They underfunded his Secret Service protection, and Joe Biden said to put a target on his head, almost getting him killed twice. They tried to take him off the ballots. That all failed. That all backfired. And you're welcome from the Article 3 Project, who turned lemons into lemonade and made this happen politically. And so I would say to these people who came after Trump, they came after the king and missed. And he's going to be back. He's going to be back on January 20th at noon. And I would be living in great fear if I were these Democrat operatives, because accountability is coming. And like I said, I'm going to make damn sure that happens as a private citizen from the Article 3 Project, exercising my First Amendment rights to be very vocally calling for these criminal probes and lobbying the hell out of these Justice Department officials to do it.
There he is, Mike Davis, no shrinking violet, with the Article 3 Project. Sir, always good to have you with us. Thank you for joining us today, sir. All right, let's see. I've got Chris calling in from Marshall, line 1. Hello, Chris. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. Thanks for taking my call. It's always an honor.
Thank you.
Touching on what your guest just said, I'm all for marching through the unicorn rainbow, arm in arm, singing Kumbaya after accountability is doled out, and I'm willing to give them a deal. I'm going to be 80%. I'm going to give them a 20% discount on the lawfare and the vindication and the pettiness. We'll only be 80% as such. But my point to my call is the absurdity, the absolute absurdity of this case notwithstanding. It raises 2 interesting questions, and this might be their point, their motive. How does a felon, until he exonerates himself as president, how does a felon travel to some of these foreign countries that don't allow felons in? And if a felon can't have a firearm, how does he have the nuclear codes?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I've been flippantly saying that there was no actual punishment imposed on him. New York State, by virtue of imposing this punishment on him, calling him a felon under federal law, he can't possess a firearm. Now, the upside for President Trump is it used to be it was an upside. Now, these days, you're not so sure. He's surrounded by the Secret Service who have guns. The rest of us don't have that.
One thing I wanted to touch on real quick, I'm sorry if this just occurred to me, but with your previous guest, Hunter Biden may have been pardoned up to a certain point, but I'll bet my annual salary that Hunter Biden has committed a felony since then. Fear not, Hunter Biden will be held accountable for what he's done.
There you go.
He hasn't stopped being Hunter Biden. He's still Hunter Biden.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. I mean, look, Joe Biden gave him an 11-year blanket pardon because he's like, well, we need to give him a big window. He commits crimes all the time.
He's still thumping on hookers. He's still doing drugs. He's still doing illegal wire financial dealings. He's still doing these things, and it's going to catch up to him.
All right. Hey, Chris, thank you. Always appreciate the call from Chris and Marshall. Alan is calling in from Gambrills on line 6. Alan, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
Thank you, Vince. I appreciate you taking the call. I am taking a position that is probably very unpopular. but I will have to start with two caveats.
Sure.
One, the nonsense lawfare crap. I don't know if I can say that for FCC.
You can say it. That's perfect.
Things, but the nonsense of a victimless crime that was tried and, quote, convicted is one thing. The other part that is the legal expenses and so forth, okay, I got to separate those a little bit. But I hate to say, I am actually a little bit in favor of how the Supreme Court looked at this, because you have to separate what happened for an individual that wasn't under the presidential act. You want to have.
Here's the thing, Alan. Sorry, just because we're tight on time, but I'll cut right to the chase on why it's inappropriate. Because evidence that was submitted in this trial included evidence that was taken from the time he was president of the United States, when he was signing checks in the Oval Office, when he was actively president. They were using evidence from that time frame. In other words, Trump's attorneys came out and said that's totally inappropriate in light of what the court said about presidential immunity, which is why this case should never have gone this far. One of many reasons. And I think you'd probably agree with me. Yeah, if he was president, that's deeply relevant, presidential immunity. All right, stand by. Coming up, we're going to have David Strom with us from Hot Air. We'll talk to him about those Democrats who are really failing California right now.